now. So, all right. All right. So we may have the opportunity to actually do some Q&A towards the end of the session today. So when speaking, please identify yourself and speak clearly. You may be asked to repeat your comments or questions if there is a delay or issue with the audio. And you are certainly welcome to use the chat feature throughout to ask any clarifying questions about the information we're providing, or to ask questions throughout the webinar. And I'll be monitoring that chat and responding when possible through the chat by adding links or other good pieces of information for you. So the purpose of this webinar is to provide school leaders information about the requirements of the district ARP ESSER plan that is due August 24th, 2021, and to review the district ARP ESSER plan template. So first of all, let's introduce the presenters today. The first is yours truly. It's me, Jeff Kirksey. I'm a native of Broadwater County. Grew up on a farm outside of Townsend in the thriving metropolis of Toston, Montana, the official first town on the Missouri River, and have been here with OPI just over 2 months, have been hired on to be the ESSER program manager, and have had the opportunity to interact with many of you across the state as we all navigate this federal process together.
Have you met the new Kirksey? The new guy?
Dr. Myrtle, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Good morning. Thank you, Jeff. Yes, my name is Julie Mergel, and I am the Senior Manager of School Improvement and Innovation here at the OPI. I have been with the OPI for 3 years, and I oversee licensure, accreditation, all the federal programs, the federal accountability system, everything to do with ESSA, and as well as the units within Indian education. So Indian Education for All, American Indian Student Achievement, and Tribal Relations. So it's really good to see all of you. I've been working very closely here with Jeff as we've really been navigating the American Rescue Plan and ESSER 3, if you will. So it's good to see all of you.
Great. All right. Thank you, Dr. Mergel. What I will do, first of all, is just give kind of an overview of where we're at in the both ARP ESSER 3 as well as just the whole the whole overview of the 3 iterations of ESSER dollars. So nearly $1.2 billion have been allocated to states and school districts. The goal of those is to help safely reopen and sustain safe operations, maximizing in-person instruction, and address the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the nation's students. So you'll remember that there are actually 4 streams of funding that have come to directly impact education. First was ESSER 1. That was to the tune of just over $41 million that was allocated to the state of Montana. Next was ESSER 2 with just over $170 million. And currently we are moving into ESSER 3, which is just over $382 million. And then a fund that we probably won't spend much time talking about today, as it's directly geared to support non-public schools and schooling students, is the EANS dollars, which is just shy of $20 million. A couple things, just because anytime we get the opportunity to spend some time with you, we like to remind you of the timeline of requirements throughout this process. Particularly with ESSER 3, it has some additions that are different than ESSER 1 or ESSER 2. The first of those was as of June 24th, districts needed to make publicly available their return to in-person instruction and continuity of service plans. If you haven't done that yet, please reach out to me and we can get you up and running as quickly as possible. And if you don't have a school website and aren't able to make your plan publicly available that way, let me know, and we can talk through some strategies of how to get that plan available to your communities. On July 1st, the district ARP ESSER plan template opened in Teams. We'll talk more about that in just a few moments. And then what you're experiencing today, and we will offer 2 more iterations of this webinar the month of July, are webinars to assist districts in developing and submitting their ARP ESSER plans. August 3rd through the 5th, coming up is the Regional Summit for all schools in comprehensive status. There'll be a designated time for school leadership teams to meet, plan, and coordinate programming and funding, including all levels of state and federal funding, including the ESSER funds. On August 24th, districts must submit the ARP ESSER plan to OPI through Teams. And again, we'll go spend a lot of time going through that today. And then September 1st of 2020, that is when e-grant applications must be submitted for both ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. That is a little bit of a change. You may have thought that ESSER 2 was actually due on June 30th. Just when we got a sense of what the federal government was going to be asking for the ARP ESSER plans, we decided you needed one less date to remember. And so we made the e-grant applications due for both ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 on September 1st. I think at this point, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Mergel, and I'll switch to monitoring the chat and advancing the slides. So.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So as part of the ARP ESSER coming from the federal government, there were expectations that we would submit from the state level a state plan. And that plan was due on June 7th. And the expectation was that the federal government, the Department of Education, would issue us 2/3 of the funding for ESSER 3. And that in order to receive the remaining 1/3, we needed to submit a plan and have that plan approved. We did submit that plan on June 7th and have received some feedback from the department of them wanting just a little bit of additional information, not a whole lot, but some additional pieces that they just wanted to kind of have some clarity around. And this actually relates to what we're talking about today, but really how we as the state agency are going to be monitoring the use of these dollars and the impact of these dollars and how we will be doing that over the next 3 years. So we'll be getting that back to the department no later than next Wednesday so that we can get our plan finalized. And then once the state plan is finalized, then we will receive the remaining 1/3 of funding for ARP ESSER 3. So Jeff, you can go to the next slide. So just a couple of highlights from the state plan, because that was the first piece. There were a total of A through G sections within this plan. And the first part was for us to identify the top 3 strategies that were used previously through the last school year across the state during the pandemic that had an impact. And the 3 that were identified were integrating social and emotional learning, professional learning opportunities for using online technology like we are using today, and then really some flexibilities that were leveraged for school nutrition programs. The other part of the state plan that I think is important to just highlight is on the next slide. We put out 2 surveys, and through those 2 surveys, we were really trying to get a sense of what were the top 3 issues or current needs facing our students right now. And not only all of our students, particular student groups as well. These were the top 3 that were identified in this order from that survey. So it was student mental health, integrating social emotional learning, and impacted learning. So that kind of gives you a sense of what was across the state. Your school districts may have similar results as that. And so the way that we kind of went about that was through a stakeholder engagement survey that we put out in May, and took those results to say, what do you guys feel were the things that we were focused on the last school year that made an impact through COVID, and what were the things that maybe are the most current needs right now. We also did another survey called an Opportunity to Learn survey to gather a better understanding of the learning experiences from students and teachers this last school year. And so that was given to students and teachers. And we were just looking at, what were the learning conditions? Were you impacted by COVID? How much? In what way? Did you have access to technology? What was your opportunity to really engage in learning? Was it the same as the previous school years? Was it different this year, and by how much? And so we learned a little bit about that as well to really structure this state plan. And then I think the next piece of this state plan that was really critical is Section E. And Section E in the state plan is the location where we were required to outline what we were going to do with our districts to submit a plan for how they will be using the ESSER 3 funding and then monitoring the impact of that. And so we had made the decision. We knew that there were 2 plans that districts needed to do. One, which Jeff mentioned already, which was the Safe to Return in-person plan, which was due on the 24th and needed to be shared and uploaded to our stakeholders. But the second one is this LEA ARP ESSER plan. And so we put forward, in our state plan, some thinking around how do we really, gather data so that we can report requirements and the impact to the department in a kind of streamlined fashion so that we're not coming to the districts multiple times asking for multiple data. And then how do we potentially reduce all of the different plans that school districts are required to do, for example, the Continuous School Improvement Plan, or CSIP. And so I do want you to know that on Thursday, we will be presenting to the Board of Public Ed and asking a request of them to see if they will allow districts to use this LER ESSER plan template in place of the CSIP so that they're not having to do 2 plans. So we kind of tried to do this template, if you will, to embed those components from the CSIP so that districts won't be required to do multiple plans, but rather one plan that will cover all of those areas. We really tried through this template to leverage local control and really allow for local solutions for local needs, and really give districts opportunity to really think through what are some strategies that are going to make best sense to address the impact that COVID had on student learning this past school year, as well as to think about how to continue to move forward and accelerate that learning and those improvement efforts overall. So next slide, Jeff. So as Jeff had mentioned, we did open this template in Teams on July 1st. And then it will close on August 24th. So you can find links to that under the OPI website, under our ESSER information page. But I want to show you where you can also locate on our website the Teams access if you don't already have it. So next slide, Jeff. So if you go to the OPI main webpage and then go to school accreditation, you will see on the school accreditation landing page a place called Teams, and there's a place there to log into Teams. If you already have a Teams account, you will see this screen appear here, and you'll be able to log in and immediately go into the template and have access to the template. If you are new superintendent, and have a new person who's working on this plan who does not have a login, you will have to go to this Teams webpage here. And under the help page, you will see a piece there that says Teams resources, and under there is a team security form. You can complete that form so that you can get access or provide access to a new user, and then send that form to opiteams@mt.gov. And so that will help you if you do not have access to Teams. So once you get in, if you already currently have access, or if you, soon as you do get an account and get access, this is what will appear on the next page here, Jeff. This is the screen you'll see in Teams. And so this is what it looks like. There's some instructions there, but where you click is at the point where it says click here, and that's where the template will open up. And so this is where you will see the information about that. Please note that the remainder of the Teams data that is collected will be due by December 1st. And that's when that, deadline will, no, they need to change that. It's going to be actually November 1st. Sorry, you guys. That's saying 2020. It needs to be November 1st of 2021. We'll get that corrected. But this is where you will locate the template for the ARP ESSER plan. And so this is the place where it is located for you. Next slide, Jeff. So what I want you to have some time here is actually look at and spend some time going through this template. So once you get in there, what is it that you're going to be expected to do? What are the requirements? I want to be kind of sharing with you a little bit of what is some of the pre-planning work you want to do, or maybe you've already done before you actually go in and input into this plan. So what are the basic requirements that are federally mandated to us for these LEA's ARP ESSER plans? There are 5 of them. The first one is to really be sure that you've addressed how you're using funds to implement prevention and mitigation strategies. There's a part in here of a requirement that school districts must use no less than 20% to address lost instructional time. And then you've got to address how you're using the remaining funds, the 80% of funds that are not within that 20% allocation. Now, certainly you can use more than 20% to address lost instructional time, but it's a minimum of at least 20%. Then you have to address within the plan how you're going to work with students that were most impacted, disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. So there's that piece of just not how is that 20% addressing all students, but also how are you addressing the needs of students that would have been more impacted than others through COVID. And then the last piece is this, it does require consultation of our stakeholders to develop this plan. So those are the pieces that are the basic requirements that were mandated by the U.S. Department of Education for the use of these funds that have been used to build this template, if you will. In addition, we are being required by the U.S. Department of Education to be monitoring for implementation of evidence-based interventions, of what those interventions are to address that lost instructional time. And how we are addressing the student groups that were disproportionately impacted, and how we are identifying, re-engaging, and supporting students who've lost that instructional time and what that plan is. And so that's the pieces that we have to be monitoring. So these components are also built within the plan. Jeff, next slide. Throughout the plan, we've really tried to, again, to emphasize that this is local control and that we really want to empower school districts to be thinking about coordination of initiatives and fundings at their school districts, to really be thinking about identifying innovative solutions that will meet those unique local needs. So those components are embedded throughout this template as well. Again, I do want to mention, you'll see some sections in here that do address components that are in the continuous school improvement plan, with the hopes that potentially the Board of Public Ed will grant us the authority to use this in place of the continuous school improvement plan so that school districts don't have to do both. Next slide, Jeff. So when you go in, you'll see this template, and there are basically 8 different sections that are laid out. The first one is for identified priorities. The second is on meaningful consultation. The third one is on the goals. And so the first, one is really identifying those priorities, you guys, about thinking about what are those student groups that were most impacted, what are the priorities across the entire district, what are the needs for the 20%, what are the needs in a school district for the 80% of funding. The second one is around that meaningful consultation that was required. The third one is that piece around the CSIP. So that's around those goals. That's the part that's building in that piece around the CSIP plan. The fourth one is trying to really get some, thinking around how do we coordinating funds, whether it's Title I, IDA funding, so that there's, ability to really address so that this funding just doesn't become a one-time, one-off, but rather is embedded within the strategies that you're already using, and then taking it to the next level to address the safe and healthy learning environment and lost instructional time. So then we go to 5 and 6. That's where those pieces of the 80%, 20% are being addressed. The seventh section is on supporting the educator workforce. This was another component within the state plan of what are we doing to help retain and support school districts with retention and recruitment of educators in the workforce and stabilizing that workforce. So there's some data in there that we're anticipating that we're going to need to collect to be able to report back to the department, knowing kind of what they were expecting in the state plan there. So there's a section on that. And then the last one is on the monitoring and measuring and the impact of these ESSER funds. So we'll actually go through and take a look here at each of those pieces. So prior to kind of going through and doing this, we really want to encourage folks to say, okay, we know we've got this master template we need to complete. What's the pre-work we need to do before we actually fill out all the sections in the template? And so what we are recommending and suggesting is that you complete a gap analysis to identify what your top needs were due to COVID. We have provided on our website, also within the template directly, some links to some gap analysis tools that you could use that could assist you with that. That will help you kind of think through, what tools do I need, what data do I need to take a look at, what would be helpful, so that you can really identify the needs of your identified subgroups, if you will. And so these are the pieces that we're suggesting and encouraging school districts to do. There's also a comprehensive needs assessment that we have that you could use as well. We realize that you guys may have already done some of this. You may have some of this gap analysis work done that you've already conducted, but how do you synthesize this in a way so that when you get to the template, you can really start moving through and laying out your plan based upon what the needs are. And then I think this last piece is super critical. Before you even begin that, how are you gathering your stakeholder input to formulate your plan? How are you reaching out to your stakeholders? In what way? What strategies, best practices do you already have in place at the school districts that you're using? But that's something you would want to do to get that information collected as kind of pre-work and pre-planning to actually sitting down and completing the template. Okay, next slide, Jeff. So I think this is like some technical, you guys, parts about the actual template that I really want to highlight. You can log in, log out multiple times into the template, but it's only accessible by one person. So you can go in, you can click next, you can click return to the previous page and keep moving. But what you want to be aware of is that once you submit the plan at the end, then you can no longer go back in and change those responses. You would have to reach back out to us, and we would have to kind of reopen that to get that back to you so that you could then go back in and do it. So we're really wanting you to be aware that this is like the master template And so we want one person for the district to complete it. We have provided and downloaded a PDF file that you can convert to a Word document as well, so that maybe you have multiple people working on providing responses to, so that you can work from that PDF file, so that when you do get ready to input it here in the template, you can copy and paste in and move through the template pretty quickly, choosing the select checkpoints and stuff like that, knowing then that it's only one person that can submit this plan per district. And so once that is completed and you have submitted that, at the end of the tool, you can download the completed responses for your district to then upload into your web page. So next slide, Jeff. I think that also, here are some questions to be thinking about as you go into this, to really kind of have that broader view of what do you really want to achieve at the end of 2024? What are your goals of where you want to be? And what do you need to, kind of maybe as you're going through this plan, be thinking about beforehand, so that as you're going through, it makes sense. You can certainly leave the plan at any point in time and come back, because you may be needing to touch base with other people, but you can do that as long as you don't hit submit. But we do want it submitted by August 24th. We do also want you to recognize that what you have in this template needs to be connected and tightly informed by your budget that you're putting in e-grants for ESSER 3 as well. These two things should really be in alignment, that what you're doing with the funding is mirrored within the actual budget that you outlay in e-grants, because this template does not have the budget directly in it. Okay, Jeff. We do have some resources to help you with all of this. They're located on our webpage. They're also located directly in the template, so you can click on these and kind of get some information and come back. So we've put in here some things on, ideas on evidence-based strategies that do meet the ESSA tiers of strong, moderate, promising. I do want to note you can use level 4 tier of ESSER for strategies here if you're doing something innovative and not yet gotten that data, and you're using a logic model of saying, this is a strategy that we are finding that is making a difference, and we can gather some information to show that it is an actual evidence-based strategy. There is a little bit more flexibility than normally we have with a lot of the federal funding. We have some gap analysis tools in here. We have the frequently asked question document from the department that really outlines in detail what you can use these funds for. We have information about the maintenance of equity requirements that are in there for ESSER 3. And we also have some social emotional priorities that are listed there, and some really good tools in that particular link to help you think about some of that social emotional components that we had saw even at the state level as a high need across multiple districts. So next page, Jeff. Once you submit this plan, we will confirm your submission to you via email. And we will reach out if there are any questions or some follow-up needs to happen. If there's some things in the plan that we need some additional, corrections around or additional information. And so we will be reviewing these plans because we are expected to be monitoring them. So I think that's really important for you to know. And then you guys, we're going to take this template. It's going to live in Teams so that you can have it as a living document and be able to go back, because you are going to be required every 6 months until September of 2024 to be continually going back and updating your plan as needed as you move forward, so that it becomes more of a working document. We will also be using this to help collect best practices that we see happening across our districts, to share them, because we see many of great things that happened even this past school year with just different ways that schools addressed the issues of scheduling or, potting, or how to address some of the, remote learning strategies and how they did some of that hybrid model, use of technology and new ways to extend learning past the school day. We saw some great ways of connecting with families, some really incredible ways that districts were really addressing the social emotional components and checking in on their kiddos and being sure that they were engaged. So we want to be able to collect those and hopefully share them across other school districts. So as we're going through this, we're learning together and continuing to update these plans as we move forward over the next 6 months. One thing that I did find very interesting, you guys, and I will share this with you, is from the Department of Education. They're saying that they're hoping that we'll use these funds for the next 3 years to really establish the need for ongoing funding at this level to address education. And so they're hoping that it's an opportunity for us to demonstrate the need of these dollars to really continue to push forward. So I think that would be a good piece. So now I just want to show you what it looks like. I've done a whole bunch of talking, but I hope you're able to get this information. So this is what it looks like. So when you go in, you get into Teams, you log on, click here. This is what you're going to see. You'll see some directions and some of those links we talked about. But the very first part is for you to enter in basic information. So this is the contact information of who you are, who's completing it, and then an email address and a contact information so that when we get this completed, we have somebody we can reach out to if there's any questions and clarify anything and let you know that we've got it. Next page, Jeff. So then we start going through those sections that I outlined. So a total of 8 sections. So the first section is where you'll provide what your top 3 priorities are. So what did you determine through your gap analysis or your learning this last year that you feel are your top 1 to 3 priorities? You can use just 1, you can use 2, or you can use 3. You don't have to use all of them. So depending on what your priorities are, that's some flexibility there. So what you will do is check that little blue box and then input in there some text around what your priority is. Next slide, Jeff. So this is also when you identified your district priorities, it's just listing what data points did you use? Did you use some MAPS interim assessments? Did you use Sparta balanced assessment, interim assessments? Like what, did you do some surveys? Did you look at attendance? Teacher input, like what helped you identify what those district priorities are? And we just want you to list them. And then we want you to identify here, please indicate which of the following student groups were more impacted than others in your district and choose all that apply. And so we've listed these groups here that have been listed from the Department of Education of the student groups, that there's also a section down below for other. If you click next to that blue box and other, then you'll be expected to identify what that other is in that box there. Next
Julie,
section.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
Thank you. Sorry, this is Ryder Delaloy with Whitefish School District. If you go back to the previous slide. My superintendent and I were just having a conversation this morning to this point, and we were looking at data areas for these segmented groups. I'm just going to throw out an example of what we were looking at as a potential pathway for this. SBAC is a great way to derive this data in terms of later on when you look at the explicit math or ELA goals and the subgroups within that. But one of the questions I had was regarding high school level and whether that can be utilized for the ACT as well and those subcategories within that. And I guess my question is, do you have any guidance on the data points for these subgroups and where that can be derived?
Yeah, so I think, Ryder, that's a really good point, right? So with our high school students, do we have, maybe some district end of year assessments that we use for content? Do we have some writing that they're required to do beyond ACT? I think you could look at some of the attendance data. I think when you're looking at, like children with disabilities would be one, I think, is understanding, what's in their IEPs, what are you seeing on their goals, and are they meeting their goals? Are you identifying what that, were they able to get all of the service minutes that they needed, or are you looking at having to do more service minutes? I think those are some places where you can look for that data. In terms of, I'm just trying to think, free and reduced lunch, right? If you go into AIM, you'll be able to see, right? GEMS is a good place where you can go. We have a ton of data on GEMS. And when you go into GEMS, Ryder, I don't know if you're familiar with that tool, but that tool in particular will let you identify these subgroups. And there's even some, dashboards, if you will, that are built in GEMS for special education. There's a dashboard particular for homeless in there. So I feel like GEMS is kind of that place, Ryder. If I was to go, where would be my first place? I would go, if I were you, that has a place where I can select these individual student groups, and then be able to kind of filter through some of that data. It would have things on graduation, attendance, the SBAC stuff, but it doesn't have your local data, right? In GEMS. And so that's some of that more school-wide. So for me, I would start there to get that kind of overview for these subgroups. And then I would go a little bit deeper to say, where does that take me that I want to know more? So if I get in there and I identify that mathematics, maybe for our children with disabilities, is an area that's making me think, that's really, there's a significant piece there. We only got 1% who are proficient over the last 3 years. Is that really what we're seeing overall in our district data about our children with disabilities? So I think that's kind of how I would go about it, Ryder, is taking a look at that. I also think if you look at, we did put out that survey to our stakeholders to say, hey, what do you think are the needs of these particular student groups? And so we asked them to identify by student group. So you could do something like that as well, Ryder, to get a sense from your community and your teachers and your staff and your families and your students as well, to say, do you feel like there was a group that was more impacted than others? And what do you feel that their needs are? So you could do a survey like that out and do a kind of a Google thing. That's one way. If you did the opportunity to learn survey that we put out, that also gives you some information about overall the needs. It doesn't necessarily take you by student group. Does that help at all, or other questions?
No, that's great. I appreciate that very much. And I had planned to go to GEMS as well as the ESSER report card. But even now, as you were making comments, GEMS has recently been updated. Is that correct? It's been revised, it's been revamped. And I know over the course of the summer, it was inaccessible. I see now that it is, and I'm going to reference it. But even as I go to the ESSER report card, which has also been a really important disaggregator of free and reduced and ethnicity and gender. When I look at that data, it's 2019, 2020. It doesn't have recent data that I can derive from this spring's testing. And I've heard that OPI was a bit delayed. This is kind of contingent that we do look to GEMS and we do look to the ESSER report card as a basis for us to have this data analysis piece, which is being requested within this. Are those up and running? Are those accessible? And can we use those as a basis for this initial decision-making or prioritization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, and Ryder, I think that if you go to that link, and we'll show you when we go to the at the end here, that gap analysis tool that we put together, that has some really great questions that can guide you through where to go to get some of this data and what to consider. And so even if you don't complete it all together, at least kind of gives you those guiding questions of where to go. So what we don't have data, right, that we're reporting that we have at the state level, any more current than 2019. The data that we would have that is more current would be like attendance, right? Graduation results. We don't have achievement data, if you will, at the state level, because we don't collect local level assessments, if you will. So we don't have that data. So I would encourage you, right, knowing that the impact of COVID really, that data is not going to be as, as strong to help you really determine what your needs are or what direction you want to go. So I would lean in on a lot of my local data. And I would lean on what my stakeholders, my teachers, my families, my students, my leaders really are feeling like, we have some other data beyond just this that tells us that we have some needs, right? So that's what I would encourage you to do, because you could be looking at that 80% to be providing other things, social emotional support, engagement strategies, parent and family engagement, facility enhancements. And so I just would encourage you to kind of look at that whole child effort as well, that there's a lot of flexibility of what these dollars can be used for. So when we're looking at these pieces here of these student subgroups, what we saw coming back on the surveys that we did, Ryder, was that achievement was the third in every one of these categories. That everyone had felt that the priorities pretty strongly were mental health was number one, and then social and emotional learning. So if people are saying, oh, it's mental health, well, what data do I have to indicate that, yeah, really, there does need to be some support? Are there particular groups of students that were more impacted in that area than others? So that's why I would encourage you to be kind of looking at achievement and all components as well as you look at this data analysis. And
Thank you
that
very
gap
much.
analysis can help. Yep.
Thanks.
I see lots of good questions in there. Let me see, Scott, let me answer that question while we're just talking before I go to the second section. Thank you, Ryder, by the way, for the question. It's good to see you. So Scott, your question is like, there's many schools that intended in person all year long, right? And so, I think that it's about then accelerating the learning from wherever the kiddos are at and saying, how do we continue to move forward and continue to move forward at a fast pace? Maybe it might be, providing some paraprofessionals, hiring paraprofessionals to be in the classrooms to provide some more direct instruction, some small group instruction, hiring another teacher to reduce class size ratios. So there's lots of ways that you could not just address if there were gaps or not just lost instructional time, but as well as if you've been in person, how do you continue to move forward and use these funds and to leverage and accelerate, if you will, learning rather than remediate. And I think that's a really important point is that there's ways to kind of move through and accelerate learning to be sure kiddos are on grade level at those grade level standards. So I would just say that you can use that 20% not only to address if there were no gaps, but how do you continue to move forward and maybe meet more of those individual needs and provide more of that targeted instruction. Yeah, Scott, there is a piece on the website as well as linked in the template there on accelerated learning. There's some really good information out there from different organizations. TNTP has a great information on accelerated learning of how you really help teachers do lesson planning to really say these are the high leverage standards and how are we really not repeating content, but rather really moving forward and not always doing remediation, but rather how do we accelerate on the standards that are most important? How do we identify those? How do we lesson plan for that? There are some districts out there that have are paying teachers over the summer to really do some strong lesson planning, to really highlight the ELA standards or the math standards, to say, how do we really get into accelerate learning and continue to move kids forward in a fashion where we're not slowing down, but rather moving through, and we're not just covering content, but we're rather measuring performance and proficiency and really ensuring that our kids are getting that concept down. So yeah, I agree with you. So there's lots of ways to even maybe be providing some planning time for our teachers after school to continue to be thinking about how to accelerate learning. So the second section, you guys, so lots of great questions there. This is the section where you highlight what you've done for meaningful consultation. So please select all the groups your district consulted with and then the methods that you did it. Next slide, Jeff. Section 3, this is the section that will look very similar to the CSIP to you all. So this is the place where you identify your math goal, your ELA goal, and then an other goal. I really want to highlight here, other goal could be lots of things: mental health, graduations, recruitment and retention, professional development, community and family engagement. So this is the place that we're looking at that kind of goes over, if you will, the pieces drawn straight from the CSIP. Next slide, Jeff. This is the part where you identify for your goals, what strategies are you using, you know, what professional development are you planning, what's the timelines, who's in charge of it, so that, you know, you check your math box. This is the goal. How are you going to achieve that goal? What are the strategies that you're going to implement? What are those major improvement strategies that you're using for these areas? And then as well for the other, like what are some of the strategies that you're going to use? The next piece is part of the both kind of a blend, if you will. Jeff, next slide. Around no, you're good. A blend of both the CSIP and kind of that piece that Ryder was mentioning about the student groups, right? So if you have for your math goal, a particular student group that was impacted, or you have a goal for a particular subgroup, you can select that and then identify which group that was. And then the next part of it will show what that applies to. Please do note that if you identify for your math goal that there was not any student group that was impacted more than others, or that you're doing anything different for a particular student group, you can select none. Okay, and if you select none, then it's not going to ask you to provide more information. Next slide, Jeff.
That is an important question that I would love some clarification on. That is, it okay for us if we demonstrate that there is a pervasive or comprehensive learning need for our students? Is it all right that we select none and that we apply these strategies school-wide or district-wide, and then we don't sub-aggregate it? Because many of these will span all of those groups, or we may not have the capacity based on the limitations of data to say, oh, it was only homeless students that received that because of the limitations of data. Can we select none in that instance?
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you.
And you could also write, or maybe say for math, it's none, and ELA, it's none, but maybe for your other, maybe you do have a particular subgroup that you're doing something particular for that you found out was more impacted than others. Then you could for that one. Yep. Next slide. This is where then you would describe what your particular math goal or ELA goal is for those particular student groups. Again, if you select none, then you won't need to fill this part out. This next box at the very bottom, I just want to highlight, Jeff, back there really quick. Yep. This is an optional box, but this is where we're saying if you are doing some unique, innovative strategies for any of those and would like to share them with us, please describe it in the box. So we would love to be able to share the great things that our districts are doing with each other and the ways that they're moving through some of these pieces. So that's an option. It's not a required. If you don't leave that box empty, it's not going to come back and say you got to fill this box out. But that's where we're kind of trying to collect some of the ideas to share and report out best practices that are being developed that may not already be identified as an evidence-based strategy. Okay, section 4. this is just saying, hey, have you thought about coordinating your ARP ESSER funds with other federal funds? And if so, which would they might be? So maybe you are high school and you're thinking through, you know, post-secondary readiness. And one of the pieces that you want to address with your ARP ESSER funds is some, you know, CTE programming or some internships or workforce development. Maybe, you know, you are going to then coordinate some of your ESSER dollars with your Perkins dollars for CTAE. So then you would just select, yes, I am coordinating some funds. And if so, which are they? And if you're not, you could say no, and then select the ones that aren't, then you wouldn't be selecting any below. Next slide, Jeff. Creating safe and healthy learning environments. So this is, again, you guys, that federal requirement that says, how are you planning to use ARP ESSER funds for prevention and mitigation strategies? Please select the evidence practices below. So we've tried to come up with you guys a pretty, you know, broad list here that could potentially cover many different things that you're thinking about. So maybe you're thinking about doing some extended learning or enrichment programs for students, and you're going to use the money to do that to help with engagement. Or hey, maybe we're doing some school facility repairs and improvements to improve the you know, air quality in our school to help, you know, prevent the transmission and exposure of health hazards in our environment. So this is where you would select that. Again, we do have an other box there. If you do select other next to it, then you'll have to put in there what it is. Remembering, you guys, there's a lot of flexibility here. You can go to that frequently asked question document. We have resources on there. If you're wondering on what, you know, are permissible uses of the dollars to address some of the priorities or needs that you identified at the very beginning. And then maybe for particular student groups, then how are you addressing that? How are you going to be able to put that through? Again, at the end, we have a box to say, are you doing anything innovative that you'd like to share? Next slide, Jeff. So section 6, you guys, is the longest. That's because it's about that 20% of addressing lost instructional time requirements. Again, it's a checklist to say, how do you plan to spend the 20% set aside? Again, how do you plan? You may, guys, get down the road 6 months from now and go, you know what? That isn't working out. We need to make a course adjustment. So how are you planning, right? We're planning to provide some more social and emotional learning supports for our students, or we're going to accelerate learning through instructional approaches. We're going to be doing accelerating learning through some high dosage tutoring after school. So these are already some of the evidence-based strategies that have been defined. And this list is a little bit more lengthy, if you will. Jeff, next slide. You'll see, you guys, it goes down some more here. Again, there's an other at the end. We try to include different strategies, but certainly we encourage you to identify ones that are ones that you're coming up with that really meet the needs of your students tightly aligned. Next part. I guess I would say on section 6, this is going to be an important piece around being sure that the 20% then in your budget, in your ESSER 3 grant, is like, oh, that aligns with what I've selected here in the ARP ESSER plan. This next part is, you guys, for that 80%. So here's the 20%. What are we doing the 80% for? Again, you guys, some of the 80% includes things that address lost learning time, but it also has some of those that were used for the prevention and mitigation strategies as well. So this list, Jeff, next slide, kind of has a little bit of combo of some more of that, if you will. Next slide. So you'll kind of see a little bit more for the 80% that goes up beyond just the 20%, because the 20% is particularly for lost instructional time. Again, other boxes available. If you want to share some innovative strategies, we have a box at the end. Section 7, Jeff. Supporting the educator workforce. So these are some pieces in here that say, are you using your funds to support or stabilize the educator workforce? In what way? Are you using these funds to offset the need to reduce salaries or to cover cost of bonuses for recruiting and retaining educators and supporting personnel, or additional pay for additional work? You know, are we having teachers do some tutoring after school? Is there some engagement enrichment opportunities after school to help kids be connected? Class size reduction. And so you kind of see those pieces there. And then there's two questions there that, you know, please provide an estimated number that may have jobs that may have been created or retained as a result or use of these dollars. So that's just a number, 0, 1. And if you have nothing, you could put 0. But this is a place that's kind of encouraging us to think about how are we using our ARP ESSER funds to really stabilize our educator workforce. Next section, Jeff, and last section. This is the monitoring and measuring piece. So we're going to ask districts to say, how are you going to monitor the use of your 20% set aside at the local level? And then what ways are you doing this? Ryder, I would tell you, this is another really, I think, good list that says, hey, this is some places maybe where I could gather some more data. Like I'm thinking about high school. For example, when we're thinking about, you know, dual enrollment, when we're looking at dual enrollment for our students, who's in dual enrollment? Are all student groups in dual enrollment and offered that? You know, are there particular students that need more advanced coursework? You know, so that's a place to kind of say, you know, this is the number of kiddos that we have that in high school that are doing some of our dual enrollment or our internships or some of those pieces there for CTE concentrators. So like some ways you guys to be thinking about what's the impact and how are you measuring it, so that we're not thinking only about, you guys, that we've only got that SBAC statewide summative assessment data, and that's the only data we have to monitor how these funds are being used or how the impact is actually happening. We want us to be thinking about other ways. So of course, I know that this list is not as robust as it could be, so we do have an option there for other at the end. Last slide, Jeff. So after you get this done, we'll be looking at it. We'll let you know that we got it. If you know, if we have any questions or if we want to, you know, to support you, if it's needed, please know that we are here to help you with this plan. And if you struggle with technically, just like this plan is just like the Teams thing is not working for me or something, or I don't know how to use the template, please don't hesitate to reach out to us for even that technical support on the template in and of itself. Next slide. So we do have you guys on the web page. You can go there and it'll be right under here. You'll see where that yellow arrow is where it says find ESSER information. When you click on that, you will see a ton of information there under guidance documents, where you'll find resources like the gap analysis tool, evidence-based practices that are kind of like ways to select those, social emotional learning resources or things to consider. There's a guide on accelerated learning on there. Ways to do meaningful consultation, especially if it's tribal, how to, you know, get some support there. So we're trying to keep you guys current. Any kind of tools or support that you could possibly use, you could find there under that ESSER information. Next slide, Jeff. So this is kind of what it looks like, you guys. So we have stuff there from ESSER 2, ESSER 3. We've got the state plan there. We put up the, you know, the Q&A sessions that we had, the slide deck, the recordings of that. Here again are the hyperlinks to all of those tools that could be helpful in developing your plan. So we're trying to keep information up here that could be helpful for you all. And I think also, you guys, here's an interesting piece. We got the timeline on there. We'll continue this session next week. We'll kind of be enhancing it, so it won't necessarily be the same thing. I think we'll be kind of learning. So if you guys start the template and you're learning things, please reach out if there's something more that you think would be helpful, or if you have questions for us. We'll be again next week on Tuesday at 9:30, and then on the 20th and 27th. We will take this recording, post it. We'll post these slides again. I see, Julie, you asked if we would send these slides to you. I'll send it to you as soon as I get off the thing here. But I would say to you guys, you can locate it on there no later than tomorrow. We'll have the slide decks up and we'll have the recording up from this web page. Last slide, Jeff. So if you have any questions, you guys, or you have any information, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We are here to help you as much as we can. I will also be putting information out on Thursday, any feedback we get from the Board of Public Ed, to let you know if we will be able to use this plan in place of the CSIP, or if we will not, or if we need to tweak it at all so that we can do that. We'll definitely be back in touch with you by Friday on kind of what the outcome that is, and keep you posted in terms of what the Board of Public Ed decides, if both plans are essential, or if they will permit this to be used in place of that. That's all of the information that we have for you today. We're happy to take any questions or any comments that you might have before we log out here today.
Question for Jeff.
Yeah.
Jeff, this is Scott again. And did you say that approval letters for the first submission were going to go out here shortly?
For pre-approval for capital expenditures?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, and actually, if your e-grants application has been approved, you can assume that your pre-approval has also been approved. But we will be working on getting those out very soon. So you have an actual hard copy document that you can have on file for your auditor, if your auditor would like to review it.
Yeah, and then could you remind everybody where that link is? It's a Google Doc. And
Sure.
It's interesting because we don't get, once we submit that, we don't get that again. We don't get a copy of that or anything.
Right. Yep, I'll stick it here in the chat. Give me 2 shakes to pull that up for you. All righty. And there it is. So, and I will tell you too, like if you on that on the pre-approval for capital expenditures, you don't need to submit a separate form for every capital expenditure. That you're welcome to submit as many as you need to, but you can also just break it up in the description portions of the form. So you can describe each of the projects, but you don't have to go through and resubmit the form for every single project. But, these plans are meant to be living plans. That's part of the reason why the federal government requires that you come back to it at least every 6 months. And as you do your needs assessment and as you navigate situations, your plans will change. And so you need to be able to update those plans. You can certainly submit new capital expenditure requests if things come up later. And then you can also make amendments to your e-grant application, to your budget, anytime that you feel like you need to, and we'll go ahead and review that for allowable use.
All right. That's all we have for you today. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Jeff and I. We're here to help in every way that we can. And we look forward to having our plans submitted, and we look forward to getting back to you to hopefully have an answer of yes for this being one plan instead of multiple plans. So you guys take care. Please join us again next week.